Let me tell you something strange about childhood. We live in a world that treats childhood like a phase you simply grow out of. Something temporary, innocent, harmless, yet some people don't leave childhood behind, they carry it quietly into adulthood, like a fracture that never quite healed. And here is the question that lingers beneath the surface. How does something meant to protect us become the place where we first learn to disappear? At first glance, a ruined childhood sounds dramatic. People assume it means obvious trauma, chaos, abuse, neglect, but that's not the full picture. Beneath the surface, there's an entire psychology at play. One that has less to do with what happened and more to do with what never did. The safety that never arrived, the permission that was never given, the softness that had to be sacrificed too early. See, for some people, childhood wasn't loud or visibly broken. It was quiet, controlled, responsible. You learned early how to behave, how to read moods, how to not take up space. You became mature before you became free, and from the outside, that looks like strength, composure, emotional intelligence. But underneath, something essential was postponed: play, carelessness, being held without earning it. In daily life, this shows up subtly. You struggle to rest without guilt. You feel uneasy when things are calm. You overthink joy, as if happiness needs justification. You're competent, capable, often admired but deeply unfamiliar with ease. While others reminisce about childhood with nostalgia, you remember it as preparation, training, survival. Psychologists have found something fascinating here. Children who grow up without consistent emotional safety often develop heightened awareness, not because they're gifted but because they had to be. They learn to scan rooms, predict reactions, adjust themselves before being adjusted by others. What looks like intuition later in life often began as vigilance. It's not about being sensitive, it's about being alert. And here's the reframe: a ruined childhood doesn't always produce broken adults. It often produces hyper-functional ones. People who know how to hold everything together except themselves. People who appear grounded, while quietly floating without roots. For many, the realization comes later. Not in childhood itself, but in adulthood. After achievements fail to bring relief. After relationships feel exhausting instead of nourishing. After you realize that competence doesn't translate into comfort. There's usually a moment quiet, almost unremarkable, when you notice how hard it is to relax when nothing is wrong. Here's what's often misunderstood. People with ruined childhoods aren't stuck in the past. They're still living in adaptation. Their nervous systems learned that safety was conditional. That love arrived when you were useful, quiet, impressive, or easy. So you became those things, and over time, the performance replaced the self. There's a psychological mechanism beneath this: premature self-regulation. When a child learns to manage emotions alone, without co-regulation, they internalize responsibility too early. You don't learn how to feel, you learn how to contain. And containment, when constant, becomes distance. From others, from yourself. Culture often rewards this, because let's be honest, our world praises maturity over messiness, productivity over play, emotional control over emotional honesty. We celebrate children who are easy, independent, wise beyond their years. Rarely do we ask what it cost them to become that way. So you grow up praised but untouched, seen but not held. And somewhere along the way, your inner child stops asking for care and starts negotiating for worth. Think about it. When was the last time you felt safe enough to be unproductive, to be small, to need without apologizing? And if that question feels uncomfortable, what does that reveal? Because this is where the paradox deepens. Not everyone with a ruined childhood is aware of it. Some build entire identities around strength, others around intellect. Some become caretakers. Others disappear into solitude, the same wound, expressed differently. And sometimes, what looks like emotional independence is actually emotional exile. There's an existential layer beneath all of this. Childhood is where we first learn whether existence itself is welcome, whether we can simply be or must justify our presence. And when that lesson leans toward justification, life becomes a project instead of a home. In a world that tells you to heal and move on, sitting with this complexity feels almost disobedient. Yet healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about noticing how it still speaks through you, in your tension, in your restlessness, in your inability to receive without giving back immediately. Here's the paradox. The children who grew up too fast often become adults who feel perpetually behind, not in success but in joy. They understand life deeply, but experience it shallowly, not because they're incapable but because depth once required protection. Over time, something shifts. Your inner world becomes rich but guarded. You think deeply, you feel intensely but privately. Surface interactions feel draining, noise feels invasive, and slowly, solitude becomes not loneliness but relief, a place where nothing is demanded. Studies suggest that adults with early emotional responsibility often experience nervous system regulation only when alone. Reduced stimulation feels like safety, silence feels like permission. It's not antisocial, it's physiological, but it's also misunderstood. Your restraint looks like distance, your calm looks like detachment. But what others don't see is the care beneath it. The child who learned that wanting too much was dangerous, the adult who learned to want quietly instead. Maybe that's what quiet resilience really is, not toughness, not numbness, but survival that never learned how to soften afterward. And maybe some parts of childhood don't need to be reclaimed loudly. Maybe they need gentleness, slowness, witness. Maybe healing isn't about becoming playful overnight, but about letting seriousness rest. So if this resonates, if you've ever felt older than your age, heavier than your years, you don't need to fix yourself. You don't need to perform healing. You can acknowledge the cost of what you survived. Because a ruined childhood doesn't mean a ruined life. It means you learned how to carry weight early. And now, perhaps, the quiet wisdom is learning when to set it down. Not all at once, not dramatically, but gently. Because maybe the most radical thing you can give yourself now is the childhood you were too strong to have back then.